Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this live stream that is brought to you by CAT LPT. Guys, as usual, what we are going to do with these series that we are running is that we have picked up actually 200 most challenging questions of VARC, and what we are doing with these questions is we are looking at solving those questions while discussing the strategies and also paying attention as to how do you handle such questions. Now these 200 VRC questions come from reading comprehension also, and they come from verbal ability questions also. So I often keep telling students that when you talk about VRC preparation, make sure there is a fine balance between RC questions and VA questions. What we are going to do is we are going to pick up one RC with 5 questions, and we will also practice 4 VA question, which comprises of odd one out, para-summary question, then you have sentence placement question, and of course you have a para-jumble question. So let us get started with today's session, guys. And if you have got any doubt or any question or any query that you would like to ask me with respect to your VRC preparation for CAT 25, do let me know through the comment section, and I would be happy to help. Meanwhile, what I would advise you is that in order to get the maximum benefit out of these sessions, make sure that you are solving these questions along with me, and you have a way of solving these questions. So I just hope that by now you would have already figured out that when you talk about reading comprehension questions and the answers there, we basically go for the elimination method of options. So that is what we are looking at. So instead of choosing your answer, you go for eliminating the choices which is wrong because of the various flaws that it can possibly have, and then you can have answer which is the correct option. So let us get started and deal with this. Guys, also understand one thing, that your strategy will play a very important role in terms of your scoring. So it's not about solving all the 24 questions of VRC, but if you happen to, let's say, solve 16 to 20 questions, but you make it sure that you have got approximately 80% accuracy there, I think that will yield a better score as compared to you do 24 questions but get only 50% accuracy. So again, the focus is on accuracy, and it is also about the time management. So I just hope that you understand the fact that for every question that we have got in VRC, there is a prescribed limit. So for VA question, you cannot go beyond a certain level, and same is true with RC questions. So one RC passage should not take you more than 8 to maximum it can go up to 10 minutes. So keep these things in mind, keep track of your time, fine tune your strategies, and make it sure that you are not just prepared mentally, but you are also ready in the sense that you do have a way of handling these questions. So I have a passage for you. Let us get started with this. Yeah, so here is a passage. Just read through this passage, go through it, figure out the main idea, figure out the subsidiary ideas, and then we will solve it together and try to understand how do you answer those questions. So here is the passage, guys. Start reading.
नंबर ऑफ डेज जो आपको दिए जाएंगे उसका एलसीएम लिखना है, और जो एलसीएम आएगा उसको आपको टोटल वर्क एलसीएम करना याद है क्या, और इस टोटल वर्क को नंबर ऑफ डेज से डिवाइड करोगे तो जो आएगा दैट इज कॉल्ड वन डे वर्क ऑफ.
Here are the first 2 paragraphs of an RC.
हम टोटल वर्क को इन दोनों के वनडे वर्क से डिवाइड करेंगे तो हमारे पास आ जाएगा कि दोनों केसेस का आपको है. यहाँ तक हमने डिस्कस कर लिया. क्या सभी को क्लियर है ये बात? अच्छा प्लीज आप जल्दी बताइए. क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 तो हमने कर लिया, दिख रहा है आपको? सेकंड वाला भी कर लिया था, थर्ड वाला भी कर लिया था, फोर्थ वाला भी कर लिया था. देखो यहाँ से हमें करना था, नहीं ये वाला भी हो गया, ये वाले से हमें करना आया ना. अच्छा एक बात सब लोग बताओ, अगर ए किसी वर्क के आधे वर्क को 10 डेज में करता है तो एक पूरा वर्क कितने डेज में करेगा? अगर एक किसी वर्क के आधे वर्क को 10 डेज में करता है तो पूरा वर्क कितने डेज में करेगा? 5 डेज में कैसे करेगा? आधा वर्क करता है 10 डेज में तो पूरा वर्क 20 डेज में करेगा ना। अच्छा बताओ कैसे बताया आपने?
Guys, here are the first two paragraphs of NRC. For those of you who are solving, just let me know when you are done so we can move on to the next slide.
कैसे करना सिखाया था याद है? 9 को 5/6 को मल्टीप्लाई 5 को पलट से मतलब एक पूरा वर्क 15 डेज में। भाई ये मैंने बताया था ना आपको, कोई बात ठीक ये बताया। चलिए नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन जल्दी देखेंगे। फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन ऑफ टुडेज क्लास इज कि A can complete any work in 20 days. A and B can complete any work in 20 and 30 days respectively. After 8 days, A left the work. A ने 8 के बाद काम छोड़ दिया। ध्यान से देखो। A and B can complete any work in 20 and 30 days respectively. After 8 days, A left the work and B completes the remaining work and B completes the rest of the work. In how much time will it take to complete the work? क्या टोटल काम आपको कितने दिन? क्लियर है आपको सही है। ये काम को 20 दिन में करना, दूसरे काम को 20 और
Alright guys, so I hope you have read the first two paragraphs. Here are the next two paragraphs.
अब आगे देखो। अब यहाँ चेंज कह रहा है दोनों ने तो काम शुरुआत से स्टार्ट किया। ए और बी ने काम शुरुआत से स्टार्ट किया लेकिन आफ्टर 8 डेज ए लिंक तब 8 दिन तक काम करने के बाद ए काम छोड़ के चला। मान लो यहाँ से काम स्टार्ट हुआ, 8 दिन के बाद ए चला गया तो कौन कर रहा है? इन हाउ मच टाइम विल इट टेक टू कंप्लीट द वर्क? टोटल काम ए और बी ने कितने दिन काम किया? 8 दिन। 1 दिन में कितना काम करते हैं?
Alright guys, let's go to the next paragraph. Yeah, so you have the final paragraph here. Yeah. Alright guys, so I hope you have read the paragraph, sorry, the passage, and I'm sure that you would have understood certain ideas as to what is being discussed in NASI. So before we go to the questions, let us read this passage once again and try to understand what exactly is the main argument or the main idea of the author and what are the subsidiary ideas that is being talked about in the passage. So let's try to read it together. Let's go back. So let's get started and try to understand what ideas have been discussed here. So it says, as defined by the geographer Yi Fu Tuan, right? It says topophilia Guys, 1 second. Okay, it says topophilia. Okay, it says topophilia. Guys, I think there is some issue. Just give me a minute. Okay, it says, right, so there was some technical error that we were facing, guys. So extremely sorry for that. Let us again get started. So it says, as defined by the geographer Yi Fu Tuan, topophilia is the affective bond between people and place. So we are talking about topophilia here. So it says the affective bond between people and place. His 1974 book set forth a wide-ranging exploration of how the emotive ties with the material environment vary greatly from person to person and in intensity, subtlety, and mode of expression. So we are talking about how this material environment vary greatly with respect to emotive ties and the intensity, subtlety, and mode of expression. Factors influencing one's depth of response to the environment include cultural background, gender, race, and historical circumstances. And Twan also argued that there is a biological and sensory element. So this is what we are discussing in terms of the factors. Let's read further. It says topophilia might not be the strongest of human emotions. So this is what the author is saying, that topophilia may not be the strongest of the human emotions. Indeed, many people feel utterly indifferent toward the environment that shape their lives. But guys, always pay attention when you are solving a reading comprehension passage. Pay attention to wherever you experience or you spot these transition words, because after that transition word, the information that comes plays a vital role. So it says, but when activated, it has the power to elevate a place to become the carrier of emotionally charged events and to be perceived as a symbol. So basically, if you look at the first paragraph, we have talked about what topophilia is and how it is administered. All right, let's go to the second paragraph. It says, aesthetic appreciation is one way in which people respond to the environment. All right, so this is how people respond to the environment. This is given here, aesthetic appreciation. A brilliantly colored rainbow after gloomy afternoon showers, a busy city street alive with human interaction. One might experience the beauty of such landscapes that had seemed quite ordinary only moments before, or that are being newly discovered. So the author is giving example as to what is aesthetic appreciation that we are talking about. So that is one way of how people respond to their environment. Then it says, this is quite the opposite. This is quite the opposite of a second topophilia bond. So here was the first one. Now it is mentioning the second bond. It says, namely that of the acquired taste for certain landscapes and places that one knows well. So here is a second bond of topophilia coming up. So it says, when a place is home or when a space has become the locus of memories or the means of gaining a livelihood, it frequently evokes a deeper uh, it it frequently evokes a deeper set of attachments than those predicated purely on the visual. So we talked about aesthetic appreciation here. Okay, that was one way of topophilia. There is second bond of topophilia which is given over here, and it says a third response. So the author has listed out three responses to topophilia. The third one says a third response to the environment also depends on the human senses, but may be tactile and olfactory. So tactile is basically related to the sense of touch, and olfactory is basically related to the sense of smell. So it says olfactory, namely a delight in the feel and smell of air, water and the earth. So this is what the author has discussed so far. Let us read further. Now it says topophilia and its very close conceptual term sense of place. So we have also talked about sense of place is an experience that, however, elusive. So it is an experience that is taken by the author as elusive, something which is difficult to find, something which is difficult to understand. So it says has inspired recent architects and planners, most notably new urbanism seeks to counter the perceived planners. So most notably new urbanism seeks to counter the perceived placeness of modern suburbs and the decline of central cities through new traditional design motives. So there is a point being discussed here. Although motivated by good intentions, such attempts to create places rich in meaning are perhaps bound to disappoint. So here is the element of disappointment coming up. It says what? As Joanne noted, purely aesthetic responses often are suddenly revealed, but their intensity rarely is long lasting. So these aesthetic responses are often suddenly revealed, but their intensity is rarely long lasting. Topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. Now this is important. So what the author is saying is that topophilia is difficult to quantify. It says topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify, and its most articulate interpreters have been self-reflective philosophers such as Henry David Thoreau, evoking a marvelously intricate sense of place at Walden Pond, and Chuan describing his deep affinity for the desert. So here is the perspective coming up, and we are supposed to know what exactly are the ideas being discussed by the passage. Let's read the next paragraph and try to understand how is the author dealing with it. So he says, topophilia connotes a positive relationship, but it often is useful to explore the darker affiliations between people and place. So generally when you talk about topophilia per se, it has what? A positive relationship, but it often is useful to explore the darker affiliations between people and place. So just keep this in mind. Now, what does the author say further? It says patriotism, literally meaning the love of one's terra patria or homeland, has long been cultivated by governing elites for a range of nationalist projects, including war preparation and ethnic cleansing. So this is where the positive relationship of topophilia was talked about in the initial of these paragraph, but then it talks about the darker affiliations. Now it says residents of upscale residential developments have disclosed how important it is to maintain their community's distinct identity, often by casting themselves in a superior social position and by reinforcing class and racial differences. So talking about upscale residential, one second Lisa, just give me a minute. Right, so it says in a superior social position and by reinforcing class and racial differences, and just as a beloved landscape is suddenly revealed, so too may landscapes of fear cast a dark shadow over a place that makes one feel a sense of dread or anxiety or topophobia. Right, so Lisa, you have a doubt, just let me know what that doubt is. Guys, see, when you start reading the passage, you just read for the main idea. So you are looking at which is the most important detail that the author has discussed in the passage, And along with figuring out that in the passage, it is about understanding how the author has supported those ideas, right? So you may have the main idea, you may have subsidiary ideas, and towards the conclusion, you may have some additional information. All right, so it started off with a discussion of topophilia, but when it ended with the discussion of topophobia. All right, so we have read the passage. Let's now go to the questions and try to understand what questions do we have there and how do we go about answering those questions. Right, so you have the first question on screen, guys. Read this question, look at the options and try to come up with an answer. The first question on screen. Lisa, if you have got your doubt, please put it in the comment section. I would be glad to reply to that. All right, guys, so this is a pretty straightforward and an easy question. Let's see what the options have to see and also try to understand where is the reference in the passage from where we derive this answer. So it says the word topophobia in the passage is used. Now, if you were to go back to the passage where this word was mentioned, let's go back. Right, so the entire discussion of an RC started with a discussion of topophilia, but let's look at where the topophobia finds a place. So it is here, right? So it says what? Let's look at this context here. It says, and just as a beloved landscape is suddenly revealed, so too many landscapes of fear cast a dark shadow over a place that makes one feel a sense of dread. So here is the word coming up which says a sense of dread or anxiety or called topophobia. So this is where you find the reference to the first question. Let's look at the options and try to see which one matches to it. So it says a sense of dread or anxiety or topophobia. Let's look at what these options have to say. So it says to represent a feeling of dread towards particular spaces and places. So we did talk about feeling of dread. So this is most likely to be your answer, but let's look at other options as well. It says to signify the fear of studying the complex discipline of topography. Well, this is not what the author or the passage has made out to be a case of topophobia. So this is cancelled out. C says as a metaphor. It is not used as a metaphor, guys, expressing the failure of the homeland to accommodate non-citizens. Well, the passage does not talk about anything like this. So this is cancelled out. And D says to signify feelings of fear or anxiety. This is fine. But it says towards topophilic people. Now this is again problematic. So if you look at that line that we just read in the last paragraph, last couple of lines, the best option that you can choose is option number A. That makes our answer as option number A, and I'm sure that you are clear with how do we arrive at an answer. Let's go to the second question now. Second question on your screen. Try to answer this question. Okay, let's look at what this question has to say and how do we go about answering this question. So it says, which of the following statements, if true, could be seen as not contradicting the arguments in the passage. So we are looking for an option that does not contradict the argument in the passage. Let's evaluate these options. First one says, The most important, even fundamental response to our environment is our tactile and olfactory response. Well, if you go back to the passage here, let's go back. Right, so it talks about a third response to the environment also depends on the human senses, but may be tactile and olfactory. So the paragraph does mention about tactile and olfactory response, but let us see if that is what the option says. So it says the most important, well, the author does not say that it is the most important or even fundamental response to our environment is our tactile and olfactory response. So this option contradicts as to what is mentioned in the paragraph, so does not form an answer. Let's evaluate B option. It says, generally speaking, in a given culture, the ties of the people to their environment vary little in significance or intensity. For those of you who have read the passage from the very beginning, let's go back to it and try to get hang of the situation. So it says, let's look at this line here. It does talk about the information. Right, so here it says, wide-ranging explanation of how the emotive ties with the material environment vary greatly from person to person. So the author is saying that it varies greatly. Let's go back to the option that was given here. So it says very little. So again, this contradicts as to what the author of the passage is saying. So this is again not the answer. Let's look at C. It says patriotism, usually seen as a positive feeling, is presented by the author as a darker form of topophilia. That's C option. Let's also look at D. D says new urbanism succeeded in those designs where architects collaborated with their clients. So this is again problematic. Let's go back to the passage here. Yeah, so here is where you find the reference to this option. So it says topophilia connotes a positive relationship, but is often useful to explore the darker affiliations between people and place. Patriotism literally means the love of one's terra patria and homeland. So here you do find the reference in terms of saying that it is described by the author or the passage as the darker form of topophilia. So let's go back to the options that we have here. So it says patriotism, usually seen as a positive feeling, is presented by the author as darker form of topophilia, and this does find a similar mention in the passage. And if you compare D, it says new urbanism succeeded in those designs. This is not supported by the passage. So if you look at the option here, C forms the best possible answer. Right? So I hope you have figured out where do we have taken those references and from where do we arrive at an answer. Let's go to the third question now. Right, so let's read the third question. It says in the last paragraph, so we are talking about the last paragraph, the author uses the example of residents of upscale residential developments to illustrate that. So let's go back to the last paragraph and try to see. Yeah, here is the last paragraph, guys. All right, so let's read the context that was given to us. So it says residents of upscale residential developments have disclosed how important it is to maintain their community's distinct identity, often by casting themselves in a superior social position and by reinforcing class and racial differences. So this is where the reference to your question lies. Let's look at the options now. So it says introduction of nationalist projects by such elites to produce a sense of dread or topophobia. Well, this is absolutely not supported by the passage. So this cannot be the answer that we are looking for. B says social exclusivism practiced by such residents in order to enforce a sense of racial and class superiority. Now, if you have read that context of the passage here, I'm sure you would have understood by now that this is most closely related to what we have read as an idea here. Let's also evaluate other option. It says manner in which environments are designed to minimize the social exclusion of their clientele, where that is not the reason as to why the author has taken that example of social class residents here. And D says sensitive response to race and class problems in upscale residential development. Well, that does not talk about the fact that it's a sensitive response to it. So when you look at what information has been given to us, the closest answer that you can get here is option number B, which is social exclusion practiced by such residents in order to enforce a sense of racial or class superiority. Guys, for those of you who have joined now, please make it sure that you read the passage from the beginning till the end so that you have an idea how we have arrived at an answer. Let's go to the next question, question number 4. Right, so it says which one of the following best captures the meaning of the statement topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. Let's have a look at your 4 options and try to come up with an answer. Okay, let us evaluate what these options have to say. So it says difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. It says people's responses to their environment are usually subjective and so cannot be rendered in design. Well, author did talk about the fact that the responses to place are highly varied, right? So it varies greatly from person to person. So that brings us to the word subjective. Let us also evaluate other options. If we find something better than this option, of course, we'll go for it. Otherwise, we will stick to this particular option here because it does talk about the factor that the experiences of people with respect to place vary significantly. B says a deep anomie of modern urbanization led to new urbanism, intricate sense of place. Well, this is not really the way the author has said that it is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. Well, that's not the idea that the author was looking for. So even this will be cancelled out. C says architects have to objectively quantify spaces and hence cannot be topophilic. Well, that is not the idea that is being implied here. So again, this will be eliminated. And D says philosopher architects are uniquely suited to develop topophilic design. Well, this is not meant by the statement as to when it says topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. So the best answer that you can choose to this option is option number A, which says people's responses to their environment are usually subjective and so cannot be rendered in design. So option A forms an answer. All right, let's go to the last question now. So it says, which one of the following comes closest in meaning to the author's understanding of topophilia? Okay, let us evaluate these options now, guys. Again, for those of you who have read the passage from the very beginning, I'm sure you would have understood what is the meaning of the word topophilia. And with this question, we are supposed to choose an option that comes closest in meaning to the author's understanding of topophilia. It says the tendency of many cultures to represent their land as motherland or fatherland may be seen as an expression of topophilia. So, topophilia is basically your emotional affiliation towards a place. So this is very close. So let us keep it aside. Let's also have a look at other options. So it says nomadic societies are known to have the least affinity. Now this is cancelled out for the lands through which they travel because they tend to be topophobic. The author does not say that these tribes are topophobic, so cannot be the answer choice here. Not the best possible representation of the word topophilia. He says the French are not overly patriotic, but they will refuse to use English as far as possible, even when they know it well. Well, this talks about language per se, and we are referring to the place. So even this will not be the example. And it says scientists have found that most creatures, including humans, are either born with or cultivate a strong sense of topography. Again, this is not going to be the answer. The best possible answer that you can choose here is that when you have a love for a place. So when you have a love for a place, it could be in the sense of a motherland, fatherland, and seen as an expression of their topophilia. So if you have understood what the passage is saying, I'm sure you would have chosen this as an answer, right? So these were the 5 questions that was with relation to the RC passage that we just solved. For those of you who are watching it from the middle, make it sure that you read the passage completely, and then you go about solving the questions and see to it as to how do we have eliminated the other options. Let's go to the next question now. Let's practice a para summary question. So yeah, it says the passage given below is followed by 4 summaries, and you have a question here. Try doing that. Alright guys, so when it comes down to a para summary question, I tell students that para summary question is based upon 2 traits. One is that you have to identify the essence or the gist of the paragraph that is given to you. And the second important thing is when you're solving a para summary question, you have to be really good with the option elimination technique. So you should look for flaws as to why other options are wrong, and then you arrive at an answer. So let's read this paragraph together and try to understand what are the important details and see to it that how do we eliminate the choices? So it says a translator of literary works needs a secure hold upon the two languages involved, supported by a good measure of familiarity with the two cultures. Okay, so when you're talking about translator of literary works, it needs a secure hold upon the two languages involved. So the language that you are translating, supported by a good measure of familiarity with the two cultures. Now, for an Indian translating works in an Indian language into English, finding satisfactory equivalents in a generalized Western culture of practices and symbols in the original would be less difficult. So this is with respect to an Indian translating the text. So it says would be less difficult than gaining fluent control over contemporary English. All right. So this is the experience of Indians. All right. Now, when a Westerner works on text in Indian languages, the interpretation of cultural elements will be the major challenge. So for an Indian, it was gaining fluent control of contemporary English. For somebody who is a Westerner, it says that interpretation of cultural elements will be the major challenge rather than control over the grammar and essential vocabulary of the language concerned. It is much easier to remedy lapses in language in a text translated into English than flaws of content. Since it is easier for an Indian to learn the English language than it is for a Briton or American to comprehend Indian culture, translations of Indian text is better left to Indians. So this is where you have the paragraph being explained to you. Now you have to look at the options and try to figure out which one is the right answer. For those of you who are solving this question, please come up with an answer and then we will discuss as to how do you eliminate the choices. Right, so this is your essence coming from. Try to solve these questions. Okay, so let us evaluate these options. First one says, while translating, the Indian and the Westerner face the same challenges. Now look at this, guys. This particular option mentions that the Indian and the Westerner faces the same challenge. Otherwise, if you look at the paragraph here, it says both of them have different challenges, right? So in translating a particular work, the Indian has a different challenge, the Westerner has a different challenge. So if you look at this option, this is contradictory to what the paragraph is saying. So this will be easily cancelled out, right? Let's evaluate option B. It says, as preserving cultural meanings is the essence of literary translation. Well, the author has not said that preserving the cultural sense, preserving the cultural meanings is the essence of literary translation. India's knowledge of the local culture outweighs the initial disadvantage of lower fluency in English, which is okay, but this particular line is actually a kind of distortion with respect to the paragraph. So this will be cancelled out. Let us read 3 and 4 and compare them both. It says, Indian translators should translate Indian text into English as their work is less likely to pose cultural problems which are harder to address than the quality of language. And this is what the author has said, that when you talk about an Indian translating the text and a Westerner translating the text, the challenges of both are different and it is easy to remedy the challenges of content as compared to the culture. So this is very close to the answer we are looking for. Let's also evaluate fourth. It says, Westerners might be good at gaining reasonable fluency in Lee languages, but as understanding the culture reflected in literature is crucial, Indians remain better placed. Well, the author does not support this idea here. So if you compare 3 and 4, 3 forms the best answer. Guys, when you are solving a para summary question, remember that the options that will be given to you will be very similar to each other. So wherever the difference comes, you have to evaluate that difference with respect to what the paragraph is saying, and that paragraph will enable you to answer whether you go to a right answer or you go for a wrong answer. So just keep in mind that you understand the gist of the passage, right? So this forms the best possible answer. Let's go to the next question. Right, so we have a odd one out question here. Let me know if you have any answers to this odd one out question, a sentence that you feel is out of place in the context. Okay, guys, when you're solving an odd one out question, I've often told you that there are two ways of looking at an odd one out question. First is that you solve it according to a parajumble question. So when you have these five sentences, it says that they are related to a topic and four of them can be arranged in a sequence. One that does not fit into that sequence becomes your answer. Conversely, for a questions which is easy to moderate, you can also go by the reading method, which is you read the sentences and try to figure out and interpret what they are saying, and probably you would be able in a position that you will be able to spot what is the odd one out. So depending what method you use, let us look at how do we solve this question. So let's first read the sentences and try to understand what they are saying. So A says, although we are born with the gift of language, research shows that we are surprisingly unskilled when it comes to communicating with others. So it says, although we are born with the gift of language, research has shown that we are surprisingly unskilled when it comes to communicating with others. So this is on a negative line. Let's look at the second sentence. It says, we must carefully orchestrate our speech if we want to achieve our goals and bring our dreams to fruition. Now, the first sentence was talking about we being born with the gift of language, and yet the research has shown that we are surprisingly unskilled when it comes down to communicating with others. Second is saying we must carefully orchestrate our speech if we want to achieve our goals and bring our dreams to fruition. Okay, so it talks about something. Third says we often choose our words without thought, oblivious of the emotional effects they can have on others. So look at this part here. Now this is also again a downfall of communicating with others. So we are not really good at it. All right, let's read fourth also. It says we talk more than we need to, ignoring the effect we are having on those listening to us. So we began with a idea that we are surprisingly unskilled when it comes to communicating with others. So I think 3 and 4 goes along the same line. Let's look at fifth as well. It says, we listen poorly without realizing it, and we often fail to pay attention to the subtle meanings conveyed by facial expression, body gestures, and the tone and cadence of our voice. So see, if you have read, all right, Jeb. So if you have read these 5 sentences, you should understand one thing, that if you look at the sequence, you can start with sentence 1 because it gives you the idea that we are unskilled when it comes to communicating with others. Then you can of course have, which is fourth sentence, which says we talk more than we need to, and ignoring the effect we have on those listening to us. And when you say listening to us, and we have we listen carefully, so 4 and 5 forms a pair. And of course it says third, we often choose our words without thought, oblivious of the emotional effects they can have on others. So this also speaks along the same line. So we are unskilled at communicating with others. On the other hand, if you look at statement 2, it says we must carefully orchestrate our speech if we want to achieve our goals and bring our dreams to fruition. This goes on a very different line altogether, and out of these sentences, 2 forms the odd one out. That was a great attempt, Jay. All right, so I just understand you have figured it out that 2 is the odd one out. All right, let's go to the last question now. Yeah, so you have a sentence placement question. This is the last question for today, guys. Let me know if you have any answers to this question. Alright guys, for those of you who are solving this question, you would have got an answer by now. Actually, these questions were introduced 2 years back. So, you call it by the name of sentence placement question or a sentence insertion question. When you're solving these questions, I tell students that instead of looking for where that statement would actually fit in, you have to find out which are the places that will not fit in. So, that will give you a better accuracy in terms of the elimination of options. So, let's read it through and try to understand where it can gel in the paragraph. Alright, so some of you have got an answer. Let's evaluate whether it is correct or not. So the sentence says, in this kind of situation. Now look at this. And you have a pronoun here. Whenever you have a pronoun, you have to pay special attention to that pronoun because it refers to something, and if you can find that reference within the previous line, that will help you to eliminate the other choices. So let's look at it. Says, in this kind of situation where two people of different means are experiencing similar harm, who will receive help? So this is the statement that we are looking at. Let's look at where it will fit in. So it says, imagine this upsetting scenario. Okay, so it says, imagine this upsetting scenario. Two women are both suffering physical abuse from their partners. One woman is relatively affluent while the other struggles to make ends meet. Here you have the first blank, all right, okay. It says, are the neighbors of both women, upon learning of the violence, equally likely to reach out or call the authorities? Or might they decide in one of these cases that getting help is not so urgent? And then you have the second blank here, okay. Now it says, one might guess that the people in poverty are generally seen as needing more help given their more precarious circumstances. In contrast, more affluent people might be seen as less vulnerable due to their greater financial resources. But when I and other researchers conducted a study asking people about the appropriate bystander intervention. Now see guys, if you have read this paragraph, you would have understood that towards the end, the discussion is going on a different line, right? On the other hand, if you look at this sentence, it says, in this kind of situation where two people of different means are experiencing similar harm. So we are looking for a sentence which mentions this similar harm. So let's look at where it would go. It says, imagine this upsetting scenario. Two women are both suffering physical abuse from their partners. One woman is relatively affluent while the other struggles to make ends meet. Now, if you look at the question statement, it says what? Experiencing similar harm. And this particular harm has been mentioned before the first blank. So here it says physical abuse from their partners. One woman is relatively affluent while the other struggles to make ends meet. And here if you put it this way and say, in this kind of situation where two people, so you do find a reference in the previous sentence. And because it says in this kind of situation, this particular blank totally fits in. On the other hand, let us also compare second one. It says what? Are the neighbors of both women, upon learning of the violence, equally likely to reach out or call the authorities? Now, this takes the discussion further. So, when you have a discussion that is going further, then we say that the second would not be the right choice to put this sentence here. So, when you say in this kind of situation, this kind of situation is given below before the first blank. So, the answer would be option number 1, that is A. Right, so some of you have got the right answers, some of you have not got the right answers. Guys, understand one thing, from now onward, so it's like September, October, November, just make sure that no matter what is the type of questions, whether it is RC or it is BA, you are making sure that you practice as many questions as possible. All right, so when you have a sentence placement question or sentence insertion question, just make it sure that you are finding reference in the previous sentence or the following sentence to have a complete flow of ideas in the paragraph, and that will help you to enable to find the right answer. So instead of looking at where it will fit in, just figure out where it will not, and you will quickly have your answers. Right, guys? So that was all from my side for today's session. We solved an RC passage. For those of you who have joined now, please watch the live stream from the very beginning till the end. Solve the questions along with it. Look into how we have eliminated the options and how we have done that. And for those of you who feel that this is worth your time, it is helping in your preparation, we go live every day at 6 p.m. We are doing it across the 3 sections. We are doing it for VRC, we are doing it for DILR, we are also doing it for Quant. And I think this will help you to have some perspective with respect to your preparation, and will also boost your confidence in terms of how you answer the questions. Alright guys, so that was it from my side. Wish you all the best. Keep working harder, keep working smarter, and I think you are good to go for your CAT preparation, CAT 2025. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.